Hey everyone, today we're back in the Presbyterian section of the Coffs Historic Cemetery, and I'd like to introduce Alice Jane Anderson and her husband Frank Paul. Alice was the sixth child of Sam and Alice Anderson, who we started this series off with. She was born in July 1895 in Bellawongarah on the south coast of New South Wales and travelled to Coffs Harbour as a teenager with her family. Spoiler alert up front, although Alice did marry, she and her husband did not have any children. She was a much loved aunt though, and even though it is hard to get information on married women through official records, looking at her husband Frank Paul's life does give us an insight into Alice's life as well. Frank Paul had arrived in Australia sometime between 1911 and 1914. There are heaps of records for F. Pauls, and I haven't been able to confirm how he journeyed to Australia, but we do know that in May 1916, aged 23, he enlisted for service with the Australian Imperial Forces. He indicated that he was a natural-born British subject who was born to Lucy Paul in Skegness, Lincolnshire in England in 1892. Frank served in the 46th Battalion and embarked from Australia in November 1916. He saw action in France before returning to Australia in June 1919. His casualty form indicates multiple injuries during active service, and that he did also have leave from France to visit his birthplace and family shortly before returning to Australia. In the spring of 1921, Alice, then aged 26, married Frank Paul, who was 3 years her senior. Their wedding was reported in the local press as being a very pretty wedding, and it was celebrated at the home of the bride on Wednesday last. Both parties wore the orange regalia of the Blossom Hill Lodge, number 293, Coffs Harbour, which can be seen in their wedding photograph. The bride was given away by her brother, Mr. Walter John Anderson. Alice's sister, Alberta, was her bridesmaid, and her brother, Bruce, was the best man. By 1926, heading into the Great Depression of the 1930s, Frank sold off stock and equipment from his farm at Boambi, and during the 1930s, both Frank and Alice are listed on the electoral rolls as living in Coffs Harbour, although his occupation was still listed as a farmer. Things must have been looking up in the late 1930s as Frank withdrew a cottage that he owned in Corampa Road from sale. They were active in the Returned Soldiers League, and Frank is noted as being a stallholder at the annual Diggers Carnival in aid of the Distressed Diggers Fund. In 1941, at the age of 48, Frank enlisted for service again, and his medical exam states that he was fit for Class 2 service. He was to serve for 5 years before being medically discharged due to suffering from emphysema at the age of 53. After his discharge, Frank and Alice continued farming at Boambi until the late 1950s, when they retired to Combine Street in Coffs Harbour. One of Alice's nieces tells the story of her mother relaying when Auntie Alice Paul had goats come into the house and she was trying to get them out. When Uncle came home, she was up on the kitchen table with a broom trying to keep them away from her. Obviously, Auntie Alice wasn't used to tending the goats and had no control over them whatsoever. Alice passed away in March 1964 at the age of 68. She's buried directly behind her parents, Sam and Alice. Frank passed away 5 months later, aged 71, and he's buried beside his wife in the Coffs Historic Cemetery.